Right. The United States is ratcheting up pressure on Iran. Today, the Trump administration announced that it will no longer allow any oil trade with Iran. The action is aimed at cutting off all oil revenue to Iran, and the aim, simply stated, to drive Iranian oil exports to zero. The announcement was blunt.
Today, I'm announcing that we will no longer grant any exemptions. We're going to zero across the board. We will continue to enforce sanctions and monitor compliance. Any nation or entity interacting with Iran should do its diligence and err on the side of caution. The risks are simply not going to be worth the benefits.
Well, China quickly responded that it has deals in place with Iran and that it will continue to trade with the Iranian regime.
China's cooperation with Iranian companies and Iran is open, transparent, reasonable, and legal, and should be respected. The Chinese government is dedicated to safeguarding Chinese companies' legitimate rights. We are willing to play a positive and constructive role in order to promote the stability of the international energy market.
All right, joining me now with more on this is Matthew Brodsky. He's a senior fellow with the Security Studies Group. Matthew, thanks for being with us. Matthew, it's not just China that's going to be impacted here. Also, India, Turkey, Japan, and South Korea, they had waivers in place that will now no longer be there. We've heard China's response. How do you see this impacting relations between China and the U.S. now?
I mean, some we did waivers for because they have special circumstances, like South Korea, which they claim their whole network is basically set up for receiving Iranian oil. Whatever that means, obviously meant something to the United States. With Turkey, at the point that we were looking at this to begin with, back in November, these waivers were designed for Turkey to, of course, work with us in a number of areas that we wanted, including not purchasing an S-400 system from Russia and helping us in Syria. So, of course, that goodwill is vanished. So Turkey is obviously upset. I think the biggest issue we'll have to look forward is Iraq, because they're obviously very intertwined with Iran, and it's very much in America's interest to keep building on Iraqi relations with the rest of the
But Matthew, if the U.S.'s goal is to use diplomatic means to bring about change in the Tehran regime's behavior, there is no alternative but to cut off all imports from Iran.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, analysts like me and others have been, first of all, saying from the very early days of the Trump administration to get out of the Iran deal, the nuclear accord, as soon as possible, and that took a little longer. And then, of course, we've also been saying for a while that we'd like to see the maximum pressure campaign against Iran pick up speed. And this certainly, along with the designation of the entire IRGC as a terrorist entity, really gives the United States and our allies a lot more tools to effectively ratchet up the pressure, because basically we're all dealing with a ticking clock, which is sunset provisions from that nuclear agreement, when Iran will, of course, be able to move very quickly toward having nuclear weapons.
Matthew, what's the end goal of all of this pressure? As you mentioned, sanctions against Iran's Revolutionary Guard as well, these sanctions. Is it to push Tehran back to the negotiating table? And at that point, do the Europeans actually start to cooperate with the U.S. here?
The Europeans are always an open question. That's something that we've constantly had to push with. But really, we have, with each of these countries, when it came to a waiver, a different set of issues in our bilateral relationship, where I've either been using this as a carrot or now a stick. The goal is to just get zero, to get Iran's basic production of oil, or sale of oil, I should say, to zero, which would really have a dramatic effect on its economy. And of course, we're having our allies like Saudi Arabia and the Emirates really pick up the pace there to keep the market stable. But the idea is definitely to get Iran to have a change in behavior. If the regime were to crumble because they are inept at basically running a country, then I'm sure the United States wouldn't shed any tears in the meantime. But this really is a national security matter from the United States perspective. And Pompeo, as Secretary of State, has laid out, I believe it was an 11-point plan that he would like to see Iran adopt that would really address its behavior and have it welcomed in the community of nations again.
Matthew, thank you so much. Matthew Brodsky, appreciate it. All right, following the release of the Mueller report, some Democrats are eagerly talking impeachment.